everyone was commenting on the visuals, so we're actually going to look at that now, starting with the scrolling texture effect we mentioned earlier, those beams of light that all slam into each other. So maybe you can break this down for us. You mentioned something about scrolling textures, I think.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah. Let's go.
I'm just gonna hit play a little bit so we can see what's going on here. I like doing visual effects a whole lot, so it's a little bit of a self-indulgent thing to go through step by step.
Do it.
But hopefully people will find something useful there.
Stage is yours.
So this effect is made up of a few different components, and so maybe what I'll do is I'll enable and disable certain things and sort of give people a chance to see it built up part by part. So it starts with a sort of blast of light, and these starbursts, this could be sort of accomplished with particles, but in this case it made a lot more sense to just do it with meshes. So I think there's 3 there that are rotating very slightly out of sync.
Oh.
And I use Blender for a lot of the character animations in the game, but for things where I'm animating materials or transforms in Engine, in Unity, it makes a lot more sense to just use the built-in animation system, and sometimes Timeline on top of that to do certain effects.
I love seeing the scene and game view side by side, and you know you've got something good when it looks good before all the post-processing is applied, even on the right, right?
Sorry. We'll have to take a look at some of the post-processing stuff a little bit later.
Oh,
as well.
definitely.
So we'll turn off those starbursts and put on this called Aura Ring, which is, you guessed it, scrolling textures. This is I guess I could remove the material to show what's going on. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't do that. But it's a sort of a ring with a sort of a radial UV texture going along it. So if you sort of cylinder projected something and then squished it and shrank one of the ends, this is the sort of shape that you'd get.
Yeah.
And so that means that when you scroll textures along it, they're going to scroll radially outward. So this effect sort of, along with those starbursts, has this sort of pulsing outward, and later on in the animation that same effect is reused at a slightly higher intensity to sort of turn on this ambient coalescing of power or radiating of power.
Yeah. And
we can take a closer look at the what's behind that. It's a very innocuous looking texture. I think it's inverted as part of the shader, but the thing that I think makes this kind of cool is that it's got some built-in chromatic aberration. Okay. So instead of doing fancy post-processing to do color separation, it's just baked right into the texture, and that's, I think, just accomplished with some sort of channel offsets, or maybe just multiplying each of those with a color and offsetting them a little bit.
And you just do that in Photoshop before, or some program, image editing program,
exactly.
Before bringing it in, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And I think this shader is pretty straightforward looking. Re-importing some stuff.
You're speaking Joyce's language right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not. I usually write my shaders, but nodes are also good.
Yeah.
I see you're using Shader Forge, but I think everything you're doing here should be also possible in Shader Graph.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I assume so, for sure. I used to write shaders by hand, but then I tried, this is Freya Holmer's tool, and it's just so much fun. If you're using a version of Unity that has the shader graph in it, I don't think there's anything that either one of them can do that the other can't, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's might look a little snaggly, but you can see here we've got some UV coordinates that are just being scrolled, and this one's, they're just multiplying them together and then inverting it at the end to get the sort of white on black effect, and the whole thing is just an additive blend. You might not even need it, and maybe we're getting some interesting effects by multiplying them and then doing the inversion, but you could probably get away with losing the inversion and inverting the source textures for not that much different an effect.
And the end result just looks so good, and I love how you're just demystifying these VFX for everybody watching. It's great.
There's all computer programs are lies. All video games are lies.
It's all smoke and mirrors.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
And scrolling textures.
And exactly.
Yeah, mirrors,
especially scrolling
some
textures.
of the harder things to do.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, mirrors especially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and so this one is something similar, just on a different shaped mesh, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So being able to take that same effect and just apply it to this sort of, I don't know, funnel cone looking thing is neat. And one of the things that I like with this technique, where you're having fairly basic effects applied to specifically authored meshes, is that by adjusting, say, UV coordinates, you can have the same material but have sort of, like in this case, an acceleration of things. You sort of have a scooping up of this energy as it's being coalesced and fired up into the sky. I don't actually really know what's going on here, but you'd accomplish that by having the UVs either closer or further apart on your mesh.
You have so many effects going on at once. I wonder, when you first sit down to build this, how do you brainstorm, the sequence of things, what the VFX is going to look like? Do you start with a paper and a pencil, or what's your process?
Paper and pencil usually. So I'll, sit there and muse for a little while and think, like, what is the effect that you're trying to communicate in sort of an emotional sense? Like, is it, a grand activation? Is it something powering down? Is it something getting hurt? And those things are an important starting point. But at that point, you can start sort of like sketching sort of a crude version of it with a bunch of like lines and pointing arrows and things. Yeah.
So you got to break it down into steps to make it accessible. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I think same thing here. I think these are actually the same meshes reused with maybe a different instancing of the material, so they can be animated separately. So that's our little friend, the cone there again, just hanging out in the middle with all the colors ramped up. And then, it sort of does a little dance here to get a little bit of a starburst going on.
Okay.
And then we've got these friends.
Yes, these I really want to break down. And I think you also have this open in Blender for us to look at?
I don't know if I have these up and ready in Blender at the moment.
Okay,
but I can describe how they work there.
That's perfect.
They are, so I'll play the effect with just these in isolation so you can see what's going on. Yeah. Sort of motes of light sort of tracing paths and slamming in at the middle there. That could be accomplished with particles or Bezier curves or some sort of procedural thing. I'm simulating gravity, blah, blah, blah.
Lots of complex ways to pull it off.
Yeah, so what if we scrolled a texture?
A novel idea. A scrolling texture, really.
These are tubes.
Right.
That I think were originally authored as in Blender as just a big long tube that's been UV'd, and then you twist and rotate and distort it, and then duplicate it a bunch of times, maybe invert them. And because you've got UVs running along the length of the thing, you can take a texture and scroll it along it. So the texture in this case looks, it's not especially interesting. It's just sort of a hot white line down here at the bottom,
right,
and a very subtle gradient.
And then the post-processing with that bloom really makes it, like, hides any imperfections and just makes it glow, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if we were looking at this without any sort of, without the razzle-dazzle of bloom and so on, you'd see that, they're just tubes. I mean, maybe we could make this double-sided to hide it a little bit better, but it doesn't really matter most of the time.
Right.
Run a texture along it, and you can have this illusion of motes of light rolling along. And the brighter the color and
the brighter the color and closer to white, the more it's gonna glow, right? And so you have this trailing off effect of the light as it moves on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you animate those colors and are careful about the colors that you choose, then you can get this sort of hot white point of light at the tip. And one of the things that I end up doing when choosing colors like this is choosing something like that's got a very, very high chroma, something that's really saturated, but then pulling that saturation down a little bit so that the other channels have some fun as well. So don't just pick, chromatic blue or red or green,
right?
But, maybe pick a secondary color and then pull it down a little so even the color on the opposite side of the wheel has a little bit of a contribution so that when you blow it out, when you hit that HDR, it blows out to white.
Okay, cool. And it's easy to just swap in colors, do some experimentation. I think that's part of what building VFX is all about, right? Experimenting and having fun. It's just a really fun part of the process, and you should take your time with it, right?
Yeah, it's cool. It's easy to get carried away. These sorts of things you can just spend hours and hours and hours doing, and it could be that it looked great hours ago, and you're just slowly making it worse by adding.
You have to wrap it up at some point, right?
Yeah, I mean, otherwise your video game would take 7 years to make, and that'd be no good, right?
So like, just to summarize what this is, it's a bunch of, like you said, some tubes that you stretched and twisted in Blender, brought into here, made sure you UV'd them, and then scrolled the texture with a certain gradient of colors along, and then we hit it with those post-processing effects with a scrolling texture. I mean, we were joking about the scrolling textures being an obvious choice, but a lot of people in the chat are like talking about how they just haven't thought of that approach before, and they think it's just such a brilliant method. And sometimes it just doesn't come to you, right, to do it this way. Sometimes we can gravitate towards more complex solutions when the end result is going to look the same, even if we go for a more simple solution. And I think you've shown that off very clearly over here. So
great.
Yeah.
If people like the idea of scrolling textures, there's this background that you can see here is very similar. It's a texture scrolling along with itself, and to get this sort of unusual interaction, in this case, sort of like a ghostly sort of gossamer set of clouds or whatever rolling over one another. What's often cool is to use the blending function that combines those two iterations of the texture is often multiply. And that's good for a lot of things. But in this case, using minimum, I think, I forget, Joyce, maybe this is your trick that I lifted from you. I forget. But using minimum as a way to blend those two things can also come up with some really neat effects.
But I'll take the credit.
Take the credit, yeah.
Why not? It's just the three of us here. No one's watching.
It was not me. These simple effects, they're quite often they are just the best.
Interesting.
Sometimes people look at my work and they think I've done something way more complicated than I did, and all I did was like cut off. I did a liquid effect, which is just solid colored back faces, which looks like I've done something really complicated. But, yes, there's something really nice in the simplicity of scrolling textures.